Thank you again for tuning into the video. We're going to try to get right into this without any of my opening comment types of things, so that we don't have a part 3. So that we're going to go into part 2 of this, just kind of giving you a recap. We're in Psalm 55 as David is going through a really struggling time. And he's crying out to the Lord about all of the situation that he's in. And then he says, I wish that I just had wings as a dove, that I could just fly away from it all, just to get away from the entire situation. And we do face those times, and many are maybe facing those times right now, that you are going through those kinds of situations in your life. I remind you again that this is written by King David, a man that God said was after his own heart. And so just because you are Christ-like and righteous living doesn't mean that you're not going to go through those times of struggles. They happen. I said as we closed out the message last time that I didn't believe that repentance was coming because the church is worse than Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is what it is. It's not going to change. And I don't care how many people you elect. Washington, D.C. is corrupted to its very core. Our government has turned its back collectively. Republican, Democrat, and Independent has turned its back on God. And so we aren't going to see a big thing happen in the middle of that situation. But what's worse is the Church of Jesus Christ has turned its back on God. Not the remnant, but the corporate institution has turned its back on God. So does that make it impossible for anything to happen? Sometimes people misinterpret me on that and say, well, you're saying we cannot have revival. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying corporately we are not going to have revival. You're not going to see the churches corporately have revival. But that doesn't mean that we can't have, because God doesn't operate within institutions. God operates within people. That's where the answer begins. As you read in the book of Genesis, you will find very little conversation about international affairs of that period in time. It records for us the history of basically a single family that lived in a remote land. A patriarch had one son, and he was very old when he had that son. And then 2 grandsons, and then 12 great-grandsons. And those men influenced the course of human history more than anyone recorded in the headlines of the newspaper. The future was actually determined by these few men and not the institutions or the international movements of that time. We live in a time, now watch how this works, folks. We live in a time when most people believe that the institutions are the determining factor. So they declare that if we could just change the institutions, then we could change society. And if you don't believe that, if you don't have it on your page of Facebook, come onto my page of Facebook and you will be inundated by people saying we need to change the institutions in order to see real revival happen. That's the appeal of the politician. We need to change Washington. I don't mock the man for saying what he said, because I happen to think that we need to do that, but we're not going to do that. The swamp is organic, And so you're not going to drain the swamp. But that's the attitude. If we just drain the swamp, then we will see a change in Washington, D.C. Scripture shows us, with a huge amount of space that it devotes to individual people rather than institutions, that people are the tools that God uses to bring change. Ultimately, people determine institutions, and not institutions determining people. So the decisions that are made deep in the heart of an individual when they are intimately alone with God are the decisions that will be historically significant for deciding the future. Those decisions may be made in such a way that the people making the decisions, I think this happens quite often, will not be aware at all of the significance of the choices that they make or the consequences that those choices will have. They will have no idea what is going to come from those decisions. But those decisions move the hand of the one that is in control. And that is not the president. That is not George Soros. That is not the Congress. That is not the Supreme Court. It moves the hand of the one that is in control, Jesus Christ. And so he is more concerned of what happens with you than he is with what happens with your church structure. Stay with me. So, the most significant thing that ever occurs is when an individual person confronts his or her responsibilities before God and the opportunities and privileges of grace that are extended to each one in Christ. That's what intercession, evangelism, and discipleship, that's why those things are so important. That's why you are so valuable. Valuable enough that Christ came and died for you. The devil, and let me not get ahead of myself, because I will get to that in just a second of what the devil does. But often what we say is, I wish that my church would, whatever follows that, doesn't matter. I wish my church would change. I wish it was more loving. I wish it was more evangelistic. I wish it was more holy. I wish it was... And so we focus all of our attention on trying to make the church become what we think it needs to be. Instead, we should be saying, I wish that I was. I wish that I was more friendly, holy, righteous, evangelistic. I wish that I was abiding by the Great Commission. I wish that I was discipling more people, because God won't change the institution unless He changes people first. And He's done that throughout history, all the way back to Genesis. He's done that. But we don't recognize a lot of times the changes that we need to make. Charles Spurgeon says, a real Christian grows rich by his losses. He rises by his falls. He lives by dying. And he becomes full by being emptied. So we need to change our perspective and say, it is not by us becoming exalted. It is by God becoming exalted. And we are just the vessels that He uses. And boy, He wants to use you. He wants to use me. But the problem is, no man will learn to swim as long as he can touch the bottom. I laughingly say that. I wish that it wasn't true. I can't swim. I can't swim at all. I love water. I'm not afraid of water a single bit. I love water. I will get in water anytime, but let me promise you, when I get into the water, I'm making sure that my feet is touching bottom before I let go of anything. So as long as I can touch the bottom, I'm never going to learn how to swim. So what does God do? God removes the bottom. So the only thing that you have to stand on is Him. God makes a great promise, and then He seemingly destroys everything around that promise and makes it as if there's no way that it can be fulfilled before He ever fills it. Ask the patriarch in Genesis, as God said to him, your seed will be as the stars in the sky, as the pieces of sand on the seashore. And then nothing for years, until Abraham and Sarah are way past the age. And then Abraham not only has a son with Sarah and a son with Hagar, he has more children on top of that. See, God takes the bottom out from underneath of you. And then here's the key. He asks you the key question in all of it. Will you trust me? Will you trust me when I remove the bottom? Because it's not about you. I have been in this situation so much. What we do is never good enough in the eyes of most people around us. I don't have time to go into the conflict of the ones that are saying, let everything go, and then the ones that go to the other extreme and say everything is about rules and regulations. There's people that'll make you feel like that no matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter what you write, no matter what you sing, no matter what you preach, it's never good enough. I often feel like I fall short. I've told you that before in other videos. The scene of history ending and eternity beginning. Hear that again. The scene of history ending and eternity beginning is with us being His bride. Well, we can't see that. All we often see, and don't think that I'm justifying our flaws. Go back and listen to earlier videos. See, the devil comes in like a flood, and when we read that the devil comes in like a flood, we think that he's going to come in with thunder and lightning and noise and all kinds of impressive things happening around us and displays of all kinds of power and awesomeness, and that's not how the devil comes at all. The devil comes in a very gentle, enjoyable sprinkle. It's okay. Just enjoy the niceness and the calm. Sin is fun for a season. Just relax in it. And see, I've talked a lot in recent videos about the difference between motives and actions. What we want to deal with in the Christian community and churchdom is the actions. The devil recognizes, and what he speaks to in this very gentle sprinkle, enjoyable to your spirit, what he speaks to is your motives. Because he knows if he feeds the things that motivate us, the actions will simply follow. Let me give you a quick example without taking too much time. If your struggle is lust after the opposite gender, the devil is not going to just throw you into a situation where you have the opportunity to commit sin with the opposite gender. He's just gently going to speak to what motivates you. Isn't she beautiful? Wow. And she treats you so nice. Your spouse is nagging you all the time and complaining at you all the time, and look at how nice she treats you. What's he doing? He's not speaking to the actions, he's speaking to the motive. But he knows that if he keeps feeding that motivation, it's just a matter of time before the actions follow. So then he convinces us that we'll never be good enough, because everything is centered around the outside. Carter Conlon says religion is an exterior trapping trying to produce God from the outside in. But Christianity is God coming inside and working his nature from the inside out. It's completely different. And that's when God does that, when God comes to the inside and works his nature from the inside out, and the outside then begins to change and become a reflection of him, then we make an impact on the institutions and the people around us. So I don't need to pray for revival to come to my church. I need to pray for revival to come to me. And once I am revived, then my church begins to celebrate the influence of that. J. Sidlow Baxter says, men may spurn our appeals, reject our message, oppose our arguments, despise our persons, but they are helpless against our prayers. They are helpless against our prayers. So society can fight all it wants to, but when I go on my knees and begin to seek his face and turn from my wicked ways and humble myself, society can't do anything to defeat me. Go back and read Daniel when he ends up in the lion's den, and he walks out of the lion's den untouched. Go back and read Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as they're thrown into the fiery furnace, and they come out of the fiery furnace untouched. You see, that's and prayer becomes a cry when all thought of self-help is gone. So I don't have to be the hermit crab. Go back and watch the first video. I don't have to be the hermit crab hiding in somebody else's shell. I can be vibrant and effective and my claws meaty, because my prayer becomes a cry, because all hope of me ever helping me is gone. Take all of your self-help books and throw them in the garbage and light them on fire, because they're not worth your time. But when prayer becomes a cry and all thought of self-help is gone, Psalms 34, I love that chapter. I don't have time to read the entire chapter. I'm just going to highlight a few verses out of it. I wish that you would go to Psalm 34 and read it right after you finish this video. Verse 10, they that seek the Lord shall not want any good thing. Verse 15, the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears are open unto their cry. See, the mama knows the cry, and so does daddy in that sense. You hear that baby cry. I can't tell other babies. If your baby cries, I can't tell that difference. If it's my baby crying, I immediately know whether they need changed, whether they're hungry, what it is. I hear that cry. I recognize it. Imagine the Lord hearing your cry. His ears are open unto your cry. Verses 17 and 18, the righteous cry, and the Lord heareth, and deliver them out of all their troubles. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. Verse 19, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth him out of them all. What awesome promises! Go read it. The changes that need to happen are not going to happen because my institution changes. The changes that are going to happen is when my prayer becomes a cry and I recognize I can't fix any of it. I need Jesus. He's my answer. And then He hears and He gives me that answer. John Knox cried, "Give me Scotland or I die." Have you ever prayed that about your community, about your church? Evan Roberts cried, "Bend us. Bend us, God, bend us." We need to be bent and quit seeking our way. And so much is about what we want and what we desire. And that's what you again see on Facebook and social media, what I want to happen. Dennis Kinlaw shares a powerful story. He says, "I had been a Christian for about 6 years when I realized a substantial portion of my ambition was permeated by pride. I had my own ideas about what success in ministry ought to be like, and the Lord confronted me about it. He asked, 'Are you willing to let me take your life and spend it the way I please?' 'What are you going to do with it?' I asked him. Quietly he responded, 'You don't trust me, do you?' 'Well, it is not that I don't trust you, but it would help if you would tell me what you plan to do with my life.' 'No, I'm not going to tell you my plans. You will never know full freedom until you look me in the face and say, "God, you can do what you please with me." And so I tried to look him in the face and give him full self. 'What is that on the corner of your life?' he asked. 'That's my thumb.' 'Can't I keep one finger on my life?' 'No. If you are going to turn it loose, you have to take all fingers off.' I tried to remove the finger from my life, and I found that I could not. You see, it is only by His grace that we are ever set free. Finally, I looked up and said, 'God, can you take that finger off? If you will let me crack it hard enough and long enough, I can.' How many of you want your fingers cracked?" "Well, start cracking," I said, terrified. At that point, I quit kneeling and found myself flat on my face before God. Slowly, He began to set me free. There is a power in the cross that can set us free from the tyranny of self-interest that either controls or contaminates our lives. If we let Him set us free, we can relax and rest in Him, no longer driven to strive for what we desire for ourselves. We will find that His desires become ours. The oneness is real freedom. His desires become ours. We come to the place that we literally begin to pray, and we are praying His will to Him. When we do that, God will respond to everything we ask. When we are praying His will to Him, "Lord, what is it that you want for me? What is it that you want from me? I need to get my fingers off of my life and quit trying to control the direction that God is leading, and just simply be obedient to Him." How many fingers do you have on your life? How many things are you trying to convince him to do your way? I've talked about this. He's changed my attitude so much. I'm glad of that. Now I say openly to people around me, I testify of that all the time. Most of the time, I don't even understand what God is doing. I just get up in the morning and say, whatever it is that you want to do, here I am. Let's go at it. Let's do it. It's when you're willing to let him take the bottom out from underneath of you and you begin to sink into the water and he says, trust me. And you're saying, but Lord, can't I just hold on to a little bit? Can't I just have my way in this or that? Or can't I just have my way in my family? Can't I just have my way in my job? Can't I just have my way in my church? No. Because the moment that you require your way in any one or all of those, you are no longer trusting God to have control in your life. But Mike, you're requiring something. Then no, I'm really not requiring anything. I'm just telling you the truth. It's up to you. Whether your life in the middle of all the circumstances going on around you becomes a vibrant testimony, or whether you become the hermit crab that just goes and hides in somebody else's shell and says, I just don't want to deal with anything. And you can do that. But if you do that, you are going to have all of your members fall off from you. And you will exist in uselessness. See, God can't do anything with nothing. If I do nothing, if I just sit in the house all day and do nothing, God can't bless that. But if I go out and do what he gives me to do, even if I mess it up, he can fix what I mess up and use it to touch people around me. Believe me, I've watched him do that a lot in just recent years. So, am I just hiding away, or am I swimming against the tide? Sometimes crawling into the cleft of the rock for his protection and his shield. But that isn't permanent, because we come out of that and fulfill the Great Commission. Go ye therefore and make disciples. It's tough to let go. And sometimes I've got to admit to you, I'm much like King David in that. I sat on the edge of the bed and just wished that I could just fly away from it all. See, God doesn't require that I like everything about where I am or like everything about what I'm doing. I've said that to you before. God has no requirement of that. He does not say, well, Mike, are you okay with my assignment for you? Never will he ask you that. And he'll just pull the bottom out from underneath of you till you feel like you're sinking and then say, trust me. That's where you'll find out whether your faith is there. And as we quoted to you from Hebrews 11 in the last video, without faith it is impossible to please God. It's not unlikely, it's not probable, it is impossible to please God without faith. So where's your faith today? Are you sitting in the midst of the circumstances around you and saying, I wish I could just fly away from it all. I wish I could get away from it all. Or are you saying, okay, I'm swimming against the tide and I'm going to build up spiritual muscle that everything the devil shakes will go away until the only things remaining will be what cannot be shaken. Hebrews chapter 12. I hope that you are challenged. I hope that you are blessed. Let's not be flying away in our spirit. Let's stand and see the salvation of our God. Thank you for watching. God bless you.